This week on the Beginner Photography Podcast, we talk to a photographer who used her camera to save the lives of those in need. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. As always, I am your host, Raymond Hatfield, and this is a really fun and inspiring interview that we are going to get into today with a photographer who is just, her voice is infectious. If you don't find yourself smiling or laughing, then you just must be dead inside, because this is, she just brings out that quality that just makes you want to smile, and it is really fun, and I can't wait to get on into it with y'all. But I wanted to share this last week. I was interviewed on another podcast, the Wedding Photo Hangover podcast, which is hosted by two actually pretty local photographers, at least here in Indiana, fellow wedding photographers, Stephen and Dustin. And if you've never heard an episode of the Wedding Hangover podcast, then you are going to be in for a treat. It is not your typical podcast, but I had a ton of fun. So we talked about a whole lot of things, like me going to essentially an all-boys high school, how I melted a GoPro, and then I just do a terrible job answering questions from random photography Facebook groups throughout the internet. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to go ahead and just search your favorite podcast player for the Wedding Photo Hangover podcast, and you'll be able to check that out. It was fun. So Steve and Dustin, if you guys are listening, thanks for having me on. I had a blast. All right, now I want to give a huge shout out to one of our listeners, Malgorzata, who, that is a mouthful, and every time I say it, I feel like I'm saying it wrong, but she told me that I say it right. She left a 5-star review for the podcast on iTunes, and it was really inspiring, actually. She says, "A few months back, I didn't have a clue what a podcast was, and after being asked to do a senior shoot, I found the podcast app and searched for beginner photographer. Thank goodness Raymond's podcast came up. I've been hooked ever since. Raymond really wants us to succeed and develop our skills at our own pace. Here, I learn the most. So do yourself a favor and listen. You'll be hooked." Malgorzata, thank you so much for leaving the review. They truly, truly do help the podcast more than you can imagine. And you are a talented photographer. Looking at your photos, if I was just looking at your photos, I would never guess that you are a quote-unquote beginner. So I am honored that you listen to the podcast and are able to take away so much each week. So again, Malgorzata, thank you for your review. Okay, so this week I have a chat with Emma O'Brien, who photographs. Photography really changed course for her when she asked how she could help her local animal shelter. So this is a great interview. I think you guys are going to pick out a ton, especially because I talk about the importance of shooting for free when you're first getting started. And not that Emma was just getting started, but she still, took a break and shot something that she was passionate about for free. And it really changed course of her career. And you're going to pick that up. And as always, I save a portion of the interview that is more focused on not so much the beginner aspects and things that you need to know to get started, but it's more focused on how to start making money with your camera, and that I save for premium listeners. So this week, premium listeners are going to hear how to make money photographing pets, how to communicate the value of pet photography to pet parents, and what products pet owners want from their sessions so that you can offer them too. So if you are interested in any of those things, then head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership link at the top of the page, where you can become a premium member and hear all of the past interviews with past guests and all of their best tips in starting to make money with your camera. So that is it. Let's go ahead and get on into this week's interview with Emma O'Brien. Today's guest is Emma O'Brien. She is a portrait and pup photographer, as in dogs, for more than a decade. Her series, the Black Series, gained her international attention and raised awareness for shelter animals, and I cannot wait to talk to her about it. Emma, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to chat with you about kind of everything that you're doing, because what's great to see is that I interview many photographers, and kind of in their own sense, I feel like a lot of people are using photography to change the world, but you're doing it more in a literal sense, which is really cool. And I think that that's a bit of a mind shift that I'm really excited to chat to you about. But before we get into that, I got to ask, what came first? Was it portraits of people or pups?
Portraits of people. I started my career as a wedding photographer, would you believe?
Really? Okay. So then how did you just get started in wedding photography, or how did you get started in photography in general?
Okay, so I went to college in the UK. So I'm British, but I live in South Africa in 2004. So, of course, we were at college in the dark room and doing stuff on film. And whilst I was there, somebody who was on the course with me was working for a local photography studio. And it was one of these guys who kind of did very cheap weddings and just sent other photographers out to do them. So she said to me, he's looking for other people. So I'll introduce you to him. So I said, great. So off I went, and I think I shot a couple of weddings for him. And I thought, yeah, I think I can probably do this myself. So I do. So, the beauty of being very young and brave, and I just set up a business shooting weddings, and that's how it started.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So how before, let's see, so you learned photography, you were taking a course in university for photography itself?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so can you kind of take me back there, because I think that a lot of the listeners are still stuck there, right? The point of going to university, especially for taking photography, is to learn photography. But in
Yeah.
those early days when you were starting to learn and understand, what would you say was the hardest part for you to grasp?
I'm just trying to think, really. I'm one of those people who just kind of decides I'm going to do something, and I just go and do it and then figure it out along the way. And I think a lot of the time, so we don't really want to talk about what those weddings look like that I shot, perhaps.
I'm the same way. You don't have to be shy. I'm exactly the same.
We don't need to look at that work from 15 years ago. And I just think I figured it out along the way. And I learned the hard way with lots of stuff. I lost half a wedding once.
Oh,
Which was a
no.
very awkward conversation to have with a client, but I think I just kind of got on with it. And I think the one thing, because I get asked a lot with photographers that I work with here, how do I get started? And I think the thing is, you've just got to start, and you've just got to pick up the camera and go and shoot.
Yeah.
Because I think lots of people get very caught up with, I'm not quite good enough. If you're going to do like cheap weddings, which was what I was doing, so the expectation was super low, thankfully. It's okay, and you can just kind of go for it.
Yeah, that I totally agree. I had a similar entrance into photography, specifically shooting weddings, when me and my then girlfriend moved across the country to a place I'd never been here before we moved to Indianapolis. And I don't think that I was ready to shoot weddings, but I went for it anyway, because I just thought, well, I know how to use my camera, so how hard could weddings be? And as you know, it's hard. It's not that it's not, if you know your camera settings, you're good. It's definitely more than that. So
Yeah.
tell me about how you lost that half a wedding. Were you shooting on film at the time? Was it misplaced?
No. I started shooting weddings digitally. So I was at college doing a lot of black and white stuff, but I was shooting digitally. In fact, my dad is quite a keen photographer. So I stole his Nikon D1 that he had at the time. So that was the first thing I went and used. And I'd uploaded everything to a hard drive. And of course, I had like 2 memory cards, and I had quite a few jobs coming in. So I'm copying stuff off the memory cards onto a hard drive. And it was one of those old ones with the wheels that span in it.
Yeah.
And it fell off the desk.
Oh, no.
And it was finished.
Yeah, that's all it'll take. That's all it'll take. I don't think
So
people
I learned.
understand how fragile hard drives really are. When they just sit on your desk, you never think about them, but just
Yeah.
a simple bump can
Hmm.
really do it. So
Yeah.
luckily now with
Especially
cloud
those.
storage,
Absolutely, especially those real old school ones, that were big and you plugged them in and they had a power supply. So I think the newer ones are better. But I learned a very valuable lesson about backing stuff up. I learned, that was, and it was an awkward conversation with that client.
sure. Yeah, I can
But
imagine.
yeah, but it was
Was
one of those things. It's gone, it's gone. There's nothing we can do about it. So
just got to
yeah,
move on.
luckily, obviously got to move on. It was a second wedding, so it wasn't too tragic.
Tell me that wasn't the last wedding that you shot and you decided, you know what, no more people. I'm going straight to pets. Pets aren't going to be mad if I lose their images.
No, 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 no. I just learned the lesson. So I was like, right, okay, we need to get more memory cards. We need to invest more in stuff. And it needs to be a case of the cards don't get wiped until the edits are complete and stuff is backed up in several places.
I'm sorry, one second. Charlie, I'm on a phone call right now, okay? Can you give me a few minutes? Thank you.
Oh,
That's Charlie. He's obviously feeling much better now.
Hi, Charlie.
Sorry about that. I
That's
usually
fine.
have a curtain that goes across, but we just got new cats and they were climbing on the curtains, ripped the whole thing down. So
Oh,
clearly it wasn't anchored in correctly. So I gotta,
well,
anyway,
that's cats for you.
that's
That's cats
cats.
for you.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Growing up, I had a cat. Cat's name was Buckaroo Bob. I have no idea why we
Mm.
named it Buckaroo Bob. He was a fantastic cat. And then he passed away when I was probably like uh, maybe 9 or
Mm.
10. I was pretty young, but we never had
Mm.
any other animals or we never had any more cats until recently when my wife was like, "Hey,
Oh.
somebody at work is giving away cats, so now we have cats." And then she showed me the cats. So now we have cats. But
Awesome.
yeah. We just got them neutered the other day, so they're still kind
Uh-huh.
of loopy, walking around, don't know what to
Yes.
do with themselves.
Oh,
So
bless.
yeah, it's been an interesting few days for sure. So I
Mm.
apologize for that interruption.
Really, it's fine. I'm hoping we've got 6 dogs here, so I'm hoping they all stay quiet.
Oh, I
4 are
hope that they don't.
outside, 2 are locked away. I'm hoping they're quiet. Otherwise, it'll be like and there's a parrot. I'm also hoping he stays quiet.
Oh, parrots. That I never got into birds, but I had neighbors who had birds, and I think that's why I never got into birds. But
Yeah, yeah. They're not. They're an interesting creature.
I love that. So I guess we
Mm.
could just use this as the perfect segue. How did you go from shooting weddings to start photographing animals? And was that kind of like the intention, or did it just happen organically?
So it was a bit of a surprise to me. So I started shooting weddings in 2004 in the UK, and in 2000, there's dogs barking now. In 2009, I moved to South Africa, and I think by that point, because I'd also got divorced, I got to the point where I actually really was not digging the idea of photographing weddings anymore. In the UK, it was very difficult. I don't know what the weather is in Indianapolis, but in the UK, it's very rainy. And I just got to the point of being very frustrated with shooting weddings, and it would start to rain, and people would look at you like you were going to perform some sort of miracle.
Yeah.
And I actually found it ended up being less about the creativity and often more about damage limitation.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I got frustrated because I'm thinking, here we are at this venue and I could be doing this shot, this shot, this shot. And actually now we're stuck inside and I've got my flash gun and it's all going to look a bit, rubbish.
Mhm.
So actually I just found that very stressful. So I decided when I moved to South Africa, I'd retire from weddings and I just concentrated on shooting portraits. So that's what I started building my business doing. And then in 2011, I went to my local SPCA and I adopted a little sausage dog called Jeremy. And whilst I was there, I got chatting to them and I said, look, I'm a photographer. Can I help you somehow? And we came up with this idea of shooting an annual fundraising calendar. And that's where it all started. So I never set out to be an animal photographer. It just kind of happened. And then I kind of discovered that I really loved it and I had a bit of a gift for it. And then, of course, the clients started arriving.
Yeah.
And then I ended up helping other animal shelters, photographing their dogs up for adoption. And then I kind of got my name out doing that, and then it's just kind of it's morphed from there. It's just was totally unplanned.
As some of the best things in life are, for sure.
Yep, that's
So
it.
when you walked in there and you asked them how you could help, you said, I'm a photographer. You had no um, preconceived idea of that the future could hold for you as photographing animals. It was just you simply wanted to give back, and
Yep.
then you just enjoyed that time so much that you're
Hmm.
like, you know what, I'm going to offer this to paying clients. Is that it?
Yep, absolutely. So it just kind of, it went from there. So people bought the calendar I'd shot and then started asking me, oh, can you come and photograph my dog or my cat? And it kind of very organically grew from there. So it was never something I sat down and thought, oh, I'm going to be a dog photographer. Just totally, I'm as surprised as everybody else, I think, by it.
So, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you started photographing animals, coming from people? I'm sure that the technicals probably transferred over just the
Yep,
same, but what about
yep.
the actual shooting itself was challenging for you?
So I think the thing with dogs, I think it's quite interesting for people listening to the podcast who are thinking, oh, I'd quite like to get better pictures of my pets. It's getting the angle right, and you do have to kind of approach it a little bit differently. In fact, dogs are very similar to photographing children, I think. You generally get the best shots of them when you're at eye level with them. Or if you've got your dogs a little bit higher on sitting on something. And I figured out along the way that also it's much easier to keep dogs still if you put them on something.
Hmm.
Because they sort of, unless you've got a very well trained dog, they will sit and then walk off or turn sideways. So you've kind of got to learn all these tricks about elevating them a little bit, making sure you've got somebody holding treats above the camera lens so they look straight at you. And then I've got a collection of excellent and very strange dog noises that I make that make that.
Do you have a squirrel? Do you have any squirrel noises?
No squirrel noises, but I've got like cats and a prairie dog that sometimes works. I've got an app on my phone, and I've also gotten very good at doing cat noises. So when people are photographing their dogs, I'll be making these noises, and they're like, "Is that you, or is that your phone?"
Wow,
Is
you're
that
that
you
good?
making that noise? Yeah.
That's wonderful. So, did you obviously these are a lot of tricks that you just pick up over
Yeah.
time? Is this something
Yeah.
to kind of take me back to that first shoot that you did for the shelter? Did you just show up and you're like, "Okay, I'm going to make noises. I have treats. I'm doing all this stuff," or did you find yourself uh, kind of frustrated trying to take those photos?
I'm just trying to think. I think these are things I've learned along the way. I think treats are always a very obvious one because most dogs will respond quite well to biscuits or sausage or something like that.
Kids do
And it
as
was
well.
just kids do as well, absolutely. So you can bribe them
Yeah,
with things. So it is it kind of overlaps beautifully,
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, it's always having somebody helping as well. So I think the shelter photography can be a little bit more challenging because often I tend to move the dogs out of their pens or their runs because I don't like having the cages and everything on display because I think it's actually very off-putting for people. So it's finding a spot, and so our South African shelters won't even compare to your American shelters, which are often very beautifully set up and they get quite a lot of government funding and they look very neat and tidy. It's a little bit more basic here. So then you've got to find somewhere where there's some good lighting and the backdrop's okay and there aren't too many other distractions around. So it's kind of a bit of a juggling act of trying to get the sweet spot, which is always a bit of a compromise, I think.
Sure, sure. Now, for that first shoot, were you just trying to get one good photo of each dog? Because obviously, for portraits of people, you want a variety of images. You want to,
Yeah.
different poses and looks.
Yeah.
For the animal shelter, what was your thought process there?
So mostly I kind of do this when I'm photographing all dogs. Is my kind of modus operandi, if you like, is I like dogs looking straight into the camera and I like them quite animated because I like to just capture that little moment and glimpse of personality. So for me, it's kind of that momentary connection with the dog. So it's kind of always getting someone to position them front on and then obviously do all the tricks and squeaky balls and toys just to get them looking straight at me. Because I think especially when you've got dogs that are up for adoption and you're wanting to find homes for them, you want people to be able to kind of connect with that dog, if that makes sense. So they can kind of look at them and think, oh, you know, I really like that little kind of cheeky glint in his eye, or, you know, that dog, you know, has got really soulful eyes. So for me, it's very much about kind of that connection and really capturing that personality in the shots.
Mm-hmm. And then did they say what they were going to be using the, or I guess how the photos would be used? Would it just be online? Are they printing out flyers? Or no, I'm sorry, you talked in the beginning, it was purely for the calendar.
Yeah, so the SPCA calendar one was, those shots were going in the calendar. And then for some of the other shelters that have sort of started doing stuff for, a lot of it was going onto Facebook in their adoption albums.
I see. Okay. So then how did the idea for the Black series come along? Because I kind of talked about that in the intro. I mentioned it. Can you kind of tell me where the idea came from, what it is, and then what it was that you hoped to accomplish as well?
Okay, so I'm kind of always trying to think up ways to encourage people to adopt shelter dogs. So we've got 4 here at home, and mine are like proper mixed breed mutti creatures. So I did do a project previously called Mutts, which I self-published as a book, and I actually focused there on mixed breed shelter dogs, because unfortunately they fill shelters worldwide. People want pedigree dogs, so all these kind of mishmashy dogs that are brown and different colors. So I did that project, and then I was kind of thinking, you know, what do I do next? And then the idea just came to me for black dogs, because I thought, you know, that'll make a really cool series, because it works beautifully together to capture black dogs, because they all look quite different, even though people sort of perceive them to be a bit boring and a bit the same. So I thought, right, I'm going to tackle that. And I'd been playing around with these black backdrop photos in my studio for my paying clients, and I photographed a couple of black dogs against it. And actually, it shouldn't work, but it works really well. So I thought, right, I'm going to do this black series. I'm going to do black on black, because I haven't really seen it done anywhere else. And then also they're making them black and white as well, just to really make the dog, the personality of the dog, the focus in the pictures.
Yeah, yeah. I think what's interesting is you're right. Black on black doesn't seem like it should work. But when you look at your photos, the way that they've been lit, the way that they've been composed, and how you really try to pull out that personality, which, by the way, all of your captions for your photos of these animals are fantastic and definitely worth a read. A great stress reliever for sure. But I think what's interesting, obviously, is your lighting, like you said, you know, and getting that personality to come out really makes these photos work. And then I was going somewhere with that. I was thinking again about the captions. You have one about I think it's like a little Jack Russell with like a beautiful scarf on, and I was thinking about that photo real quick. No, but you're right. Having it as a full black series, I think what it does is it brings all the attention to the animal's face.
Yes.
You know, whereas we can see the whole animal. I feel like we know what animals look like. You know.
Yes.
And as somebody who, I mean, I've never, you know, looked at a pedigree animal, tried to, you know, look at them for how perfect they are. I just always look at their face, because you know, animals look funny. And when you have the same color backdrop and the color of the animal, your attention just goes right to that face, and it does bring that personality to them. So that is, I just want to commend you on that. That is, you know,
thank you very
great
much.
job for taking a risk, and it totally paid off. I totally stole your thunder. Let's get back to the idea as to why focus on black animals.
Okay, so I think following on from the mixed breed mutts that I did the series of, the other thing is black dogs are the least likely to be adopted if they end up at a shelter. They are, there's quite a few theories on it. I've done a bit of research on it. And I think the problem is they all kind of are perceived to look a bit boring because they don't have individual markings. I think there's a bit of a perception that maybe they're more aggressive, because some of them, especially if you've got dogs with very sort of bright brown eyes, they can look a bit menacing. So then it's a thing called black dog syndrome. It's a huge problem worldwide. So for me, it was kind of, what can I bring attention to with my work and try and get that message out. And I did it I didn't want to, we were talking about the captions, because I was kind of putting this series together and I thought, I've got the option of going super serious with it. And, this is Casper, and he spent 10 years at a shelter and he's just been adopted. But I think we're all a bit fed up of negative and serious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of, and it was a total personal project. So I thought, what, screw it. I'm just going to go wild here, and I'm just going to let my inner creative out and do some scribbling with these captions. So I thought, let me just make it totally fun. And I captioned them obviously like the dogs of people. And it kind of, everybody loved it. And it got, it went viral on Board Panda. I mean, it's gone around the world, this project. And I don't think it would have done if I'd kept it super serious.
Sure. Everybody likes to, like you said, people are very serious. It's kind of, we hear a lot of sad news. If there's anything that can kind of brighten your day, especially underneath it, it's a very sad topic, that
it is, yeah.
I believe that you shared with me that black dogs are the most euthanized animals, like you said, because they're just not being adopted. So taking this seemingly sad subject and then kind of turning it around and giving them that personality really does help. So what was it that you hoped to accomplish? Was it just the awareness, or was it something bigger than that?
So it was literally making people more aware of it, and just kind of drawing attention to it, because I'm very much, we kind of talked about how starting out as a wedding photographer, but I actually wanted to become a photographer when I grew up, because I wanted to tell stories. So I was always very influenced by documentary photographers. So W. Eugene Smith is one of my all-time favorite photographers. And I loved that he did stuff for Life magazine. And I loved that he shot a body of work of a Japanese village. And a lot of the children there were being born with limb deformities. And it actually turns out that there was a factory kind of nearby that was pumping effluent into the water, and they were eating the fish, and these children were being born very deformed. And the images he took made the world aware of it, and it also was very instrumental in them winning a lawsuit. And I was just so inspired, because I thought, how amazing to be making work that makes such a huge difference. So it's always kind of been my motivation with it. So to put this series together and just to do something, to do my bit to, I guess, make a bit of a difference in the world, was what kind of drove it. But to do it in a way that was relatable and entertaining is not quite the right word, but that people would pick it up, enjoy it, and share it. Because the more that happens, obviously, the more people know about it. Because I've had messages from quite a few people who've seen it who didn't know about black dog syndrome. So it's been quite wonderful to know that actually the work made an impact.
So have you gotten any messages of hearing of people who have adopted black dogs or cats purely by learning about the education that you're providing them through these photographs?
Not yet, but I did have quite a lot of messages from people who'd seen the series and were busy sharing their adopted rescue dogs with me. I had a message from somebody, I think it was in Australia, who said, I didn't know about this, but the next dog I'm going to get will be one from a shelter, and it will be a black one.
Wow.
So
that's got to feel good.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So I'm like, okay, good. I've done something there. So one thing I was going to just drop in for you is there's a documentary that's on Netflix called Life in the Doghouse, and it's a documentary about Danny and Ron's rescue. Now I think they are in Texas somewhere. We'll just have to check that. And it talks about they have rescues in their house, so they've adopted out like 11,000 dogs, which is phenomenal. But there's a sequence in the documentary where they go to a shelter, because they often go and pick up the dogs that are sort of running out of time, and the shelters give them to them so they can adopt them out. And there's one sequence where they go to a shelter, and that shelter won't allow them in, but they bring out black dog after black dog after. They bring out like 12 black dogs and hand them over to them.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So it was kind of, it's a reality.
Sure. Not just in South Africa, but worldwide.
Yeah. Worldwide. Yeah.
Oh man. That's, I'm going to have to check that out. And obviously I will put links to that in the show notes if anybody's listening and wants to check that out.
Yeah.
So let's transition a bit from the Black series, because obviously taking photos of, cute animals just sounds totally like a dream job, right? It sounds like so much fun. You just get to play with dogs all day, get to pet them. It's awesome. But I want to know, how do you convince, when you're not working with a shelter, how do you convince potential clients, the pet owners, to spend money on pet photography? Hey, Raymond here, and if you're listening to this, you are listening to the free version of today's interview. If you want to hear more from today's guest about the business of photography, consider becoming a premium member. Every week, guests answer questions about products, pricing, packages, and so much more that will help your growing photography business thrive. This is the next logical step. To join, head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership button at the top of the page. Yes, I love it. Oh my gosh, so many great tips right there on obviously not only being able to make money photographing animals, but just how to do it in a very efficient way and get that done. So let's talk a little bit kind of about, as somebody who shot weddings, you understand, and as somebody who wanted to tell stories with their camera, you understand that when you go to a wedding, there's a very clear story that's being told that day, and it's your job to capture it. How do you add story onto your portraits of pets for your clients?
That is a very good question. I think for the studio portraits, it's kind of it's not so much a story, I suppose. It's kind of capturing that moment in time with the dogs. Especially if I'm just shooting kind of dog portraits, you're capturing people's beautiful fur children. But if I'm going to a park or something, so often I do location shoots as well. So sometimes I'll always find out from a client, how their dog is with traveling. What are they like coming to new places? Because I say some dogs would really not cope very well in a studio at all. So if we go to a park or something, you've got a bit more scope for capturing a bit more variety, I suppose. But I think for me, it's about capturing, especially if you're photographing pets with their owners or their parents, as everyone refers themselves as. It's kind of capturing that interaction and that sense of fun, because dogs are fun. Especially, most people are saying to me, "Oh, my dog doesn't behave." I'm like, well, okay, I don't really expect them to. It's fine, because you should meet mine. They really don't behave. Yes, it's a bit like a circus here most of the time. So it's capturing kind of the interaction and the moments of people kind of holding their dogs, and something funny happens, and it's like there's little in-between moments as opposed to the very staged portraits. And I think that with the studio stuff, it's like really capturing the dog's personality. So I'll say to people, I don't like to show people too many pictures during the after the shoot. I don't know how you feel about that, because I know some photographers are like, don't show the client anything on camera, and some people will happily flick through.
Right.
But I always like to just show them a couple and just say to them, have I got the dog as you see them? Mm-hmm. Have I got their real, when you look at them and you really see, Lucy, for instance, is this a really Lucy look? And most of the time, if I've done my job properly, they'll say, yes, that's perfect, because you've just got that. You just got Lucy's trademark, whatever she does.
Right.
So it's just that kind of personality, really. I think that comes in.
A lot of times when I ask that question, as a wedding photographer, I think of sometimes photos as a series. And as I asked that question to you, I was kind of thinking about that question as a whole, and how even I often think of that photo, The Afghan Girl by Stephen McCurry, who that is just one photo, right? And that's not like we don't it's not like an environmental portrait. We don't see the environment in which she's in. We don't know her living conditions. It's just that close-up portrait, and yet so much story can be pulled out of that one photo based on how we see it. And I would assume that it's a lot of times the same for an animal. You're not trying to go off and create something that's like like for an engagement session, you're going out and you're trying to like look at this beautiful place and look at how much like in love we are. But with a portrait, it's a little different. you made me want to change my questions and think about photography a little bit differently today. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, um, let's talk a little bit about lighting.
Okay.
You obviously, as you said, you go out in the field. You photograph
Hmm.
animals at the park or at home, and then you also photograph animals in the studio. Would you
Yeah.
say it's about 50-50, or is it split a little bit differently?
Yeah, it's probably 50-50, I'd say.
Okay. And do you find that that's because that's primarily what you show is the stuff that you shoot in studio?
So I think also here it's been a little bit because we're in South Africa. We're just coming out of winter now, and in winter
Oh, lucky
around
you.
around Johannesburg where we are, it doesn't rain all winter. So everything, the grass is okay. Obviously, the leaves fall off the trees, which isn't really great, but the grass goes brown. So actually, outdoors in a park or anything is pretty much off limits. So the only other option is to go kind of into this Johannesburg kind of city center, which one has to be. It's quite cool, but you've got to be a little bit careful. It can be a little bit. It's a bit of a dangerous place potentially. So if you've got clients who are brave, and I can say to them, "How do you feel about a real kind of grungy urban shoot?" That's cool. They'll go, but oftentimes people all say, "Well, we'd rather come to the studio." So,
Mhm. Gotcha.
so for winter, I've been doing a lot of studio stuff. So now spring is here, and it's starting to get green and warm up. So I'll be doing more outdoor stuff. So it's a little bit weather dependent.
Yeah. I would totally imagine that. So when you are outdoors, obviously indoors you need full control of lighting. When you're
Yes.
outdoors, what does the lighting setup look for you? Or is it all natural? Do you have a
Yep.
flash and softbox?
Nope. So I do all natural light when I'm outside, and if I'm doing kind of park shoots, I generally steer everything towards kind of late afternoon,
Yeah.
just so you get that nice kind of afternoon lighting. I tend to backlight everything. So, and then I've got a silver reflector that I work with.
Wonderful.
I think for me, I keep it simple because I think also with, like I say, I do lots of stuff with dogs and with children and with families. And I think the less complicated you make it, the easier it is for people to feel comfortable. Because for me, my work's very much about capturing character and a sense of fun. So, I see lots of photographers who do these beautiful, very artistic shots, which look wonderful, but it's totally not what I do. So I tend to just try and keep it very simple. So it's just clients don't feel intimidated. And also if they're not quite in the perfect spot, I can move. It doesn't, there's not too much kind of precision involved. Because with dogs, you kind of difficult to be precise. So
Sure. Yeah.
you
Well,
just have to sort of roll with it. Oh, they're over there. Okay, that's fine. Let me move that way, So
so then how does that vary when you go into the studio? Because obviously you're going from a very simple, show up and shoot, just angle the reflector to now being in the studio, full control of lighting. Is just tell me how different of an experience that is for both you and the client.
So my studio setup, I still keep it quite simple. So I've got a really big octo box that I use most of the time for dogs. So I don't have to worry too much if they're a little bit to the left or, they're not quite in the perfect spot. Because I think that's the one thing with dogs, and like we've said, with photographing children, is you can't get too hung up on you've got to sit on that X I've made with tape on the floor.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just going to have a frustrating shoot, and it frustrates the client as well. And I think one thing I'm very keen on is making sure my clients have a good experience, because I think actually the experience of a photo shoot makes the images,
Hmm. Hmm.
because people then look at those images and they're like, oh, we had so much fun. I love these pictures.
Yeah. We got to do it again next year. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
That's what you want.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with weddings, when I go out and shoot, I
Hmm.
this is gonna sound so geeky. I went through Lightroom and looked at all of my settings, and I found that f2.8 was my most used
Yeah.
aperture. When it comes
Okay.
to dogs and their very rambunctious nature, is something like f2.8 and the shallow depth of field that you get from that something that you can use, or do you have to stop down to a 5.6 or an 8 to be able to capture them?
I probably and not really quite brave enough to do 2.8 all the time, because you know full well you've got to be so precise with that. If it's off slightly, it's done.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of anywhere between 4 and 5.6, maybe 6.3 if I've got a couple of dogs. I don't generally go much more than that, because I do like a nice soft background, especially if you're out at a park. It really does draw the focus to the animal. So we know all about apertures and depth of field. Hopefully everyone who's listening has got a bit of an idea about that.
Yes.
So yeah, and then in studio, because I'm usually shooting against a plain backdrop, it doesn't really matter.
Of course.
So in studio, I might be anywhere between f6 and 8, depending on kind of what I'm shooting.
The lighting setup.
Whether I'm shooting white background or black background. Yeah.
I gotcha. Very cool. When I'm sure, as kind of like last week, I interviewed a photographer who shoots food, right?
Okay.
Lots of food. And I kind of brought up the idea that it's like we all eat food. We can all, that's kind of how Instagram gained its popularity, right? People were taking pictures of the food and posting it. But just because people were taking pictures of the food doesn't mean that it was necessarily good. Just because people take photos of their pets doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be good. Is there any commonly taught misinformation or poor information that you see being taught to new photographers who want to photograph their pets? I don't know if you heard that. That's
I did. He's having a great time.
Really excited to go outside. Yeah.
Oh, bless. I'm just trying to think, really. So the one thing is that I'll get a lot of the time that black dogs are really difficult to photograph. So, which they are. It's all about the lighting, especially with and I think the thing with that is if you've got your black dog against a light background, it's not going to work at all, and with a cell phone or what have you. So that's one thing that I think people kind of really struggle with. I think there's this sort of preference for people that fill flash is like a go-to. And I'm not a big fan of fill flash, especially kind of with outdoors stuff. I think if you can learn kind of how to light stuff properly outside, you don't necessarily need it. But it depends on your photography, because I think for some people it kind of suits their style of photography. For mine, it's kind of not really my jam. And I think also the biggest myth that I hear a lot of the time from people is that you have to shoot on manual. So I shoot on aperture priority. Apart from when I'm in the studio, I'm on manual, obviously, because I've got to really control the settings there. But I shoot on aperture priority the rest of the time.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. And it's quite interesting. I have lots of people, I do workshops for Nikon here, and often people will come and they're really struggling because they've done a bit of an online course somewhere and they're struggling to work with their camera on manual. Because it is quite, if you're not familiar with it, there's lots of things to change, and you change your aperture, and then you've got pictures that are too bright. And I think people just get very frustrated with not knowing quite what does what.
Yeah, exactly. And that compensation between all three, your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Yeah, I find that as well. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Have you ever had a failure, an apparent failure to yourself that you think actually looking back set you up better for success?
Right. I think the losing half a wedding was a pretty epic failure.
Sure, yeah. I think we can all agree there, yeah. But here you are today. Yeah, so everything turned out okay in the end.
It did, and I back up. I back up obsessively.
Can you kind of walk us through that then? I'd love to hear. I love to hear backup strategies, but that's not a question that I hear very often, or that I ask very often on the podcast.
Okay, so where I live, we don't have access to fiber currently. We are in Africa, so I can't at the moment use cloud backup because we just don't have quite the internet upload capacity. So my backup strategy is that I upload everything from my memory cards onto an external hard drive. And then I'll do my editing. I'm going to actually send a lot of my editing off to somebody to do, and I get that back and I finish it off. And I will save a copy of the edits on my Mac, and I'll save a copy on another external hard drive. So I have 3 copies. And then obviously intermittently I back the Mac up, so probably on a different hard drive. So that probably makes 4 copies. So I am fastidious about it, and I won't wipe those memory cards until that backup is done and I know they're all safe and I've checked it a couple of times.
Sure. Oh man, I get that. After that first mistake,
Yeah.
you don't want to do something like that again. No.
No.
One
No.
question I hear a
No.
lot from new photographers is, when do you delete photos? Do you delete the photos that you don't deliver? Do you delete all the photos after a certain amount of time? How does that work for you?
Okay, great question. So I will, the files that I've edited, I'm obviously shooting in RAW. So I make a RAW set of images in a different folder. And then once my edit is done, and once I've been to see the client, and once they've ordered everything, I will wipe all the unused photos, all the unused RAW files, but I keep the RAW files I've edited. I just keep them on that drive. And then obviously I've got JPEG copies that are sitting elsewhere that I keep. I don't delete I don't delete anything really aside from the unused RAW files.
Got it. Love it. Well, Emma, I don't want to take up much more of your time. You've shared so much about photographing animals and beautiful dogs and even weddings as well. Before I let you go, can you share with the listeners where they can, I guess, a little bit more about you and where they can find you online?
Okay, so you can find me online. I've got a couple of websites. My website is emmaobrien.com, where you'll find my family and my doggy photography. I also do business mentoring for other photographers, so you'll find that at mentoringforcreatives.com. You can find me on Instagram at Emma O'Brien Photo. You can find me on Facebook at Emma O'Brien Photo, and I've got a Mentoring for Creatives Facebook page as well. And then I also have another kind of a website that I'm sort of pitching. I'm pitching to galleries at the moment with my work. So this is my more highbrow website, which is dogart.photography.
Oh, I
so
love that.
it's a bit more. The images are a bit bigger on there. So that's the posh site, shall we say?
I like to tell people. I feel like so many people feel like they're. And I'm not saying this is the case for you, but there's a lot of photographers who think that their ideas won't work, or that it's not like big for mainstream. And I always love to bring up the Andy Warhol Campbell Soup photo. Like, who would have thought that would have been a good idea? And it certainly would have been me. And yet, if I would have told Andy Warhol, not that he would ever ask for my opinion, obviously, but that idea was a bad idea, then the world would be missing out on a piece of art that is beloved by many. So, I love that you're going out and you're trying lots of new things. And again, as somebody who talks to a lot of photographers who, in their own way, change the world, you are doing it in a more direct way. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast and sharing everything that you did today with the listeners. So again, Emma, thank you so much for coming on. And I'm excited to keep up with you in the future and continue to read those wonderful captions.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been lovely to be able to chat with you and share my work and my ideas with you, Raymond.
Emma, if you are listening right now, I just got to say thank you so much for the fun hour that we spent together and just you sharing everything that you did about your inspirational story. And it's just really great to hear how you can use a camera to, it's not mutually exclusive to either make money with your camera or do good things for the world with your camera. It's not either or. You can clearly do both, and you are living proof of that. And again, I really appreciate you sharing as much as you did. My biggest takeaway from this interview is simply how quickly inspiration can strike. Emma said that she was a wedding photographer and had no intentions of photographing animals, especially when she first got into photography. But she tried it out after she made a big move. And now this is her jam. Like, she's known as a pet photographer, and she just did it from doing it once, from trying something new that she didn't know anything about. She gave it a shot. She gave it her all, and she found that she loved it. You don't know what you don't know. I never, she never thought that she would be a pet photographer. She tried it, and now this is her thing. This is so awesome. And when you try, you might find something that just changes your life or the life of others. So that was definitely my biggest takeaway from this episode with Emma O'Brien. Now, I want to share, last week I mentioned that I created 52 presets for y'all to download, presets in Lightroom, and you guys loved them. And it has been so cool to see you use these presets to edit one of my raw photos that I posted in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. One thing that became very clear to me, and it's kind of always been clear, but I guess just visually seeing it in front of me, is just how subjective photography is. And there are just so many ways to edit the exact same photo, and what's cool is that none of them are wrong. So I hope that gives you hope. I hope that gives you inspiration, that there's no right or wrong way to do things. There are best practices, of course, but ultimately, it's not like you get graded on how you edit a photo, because ultimately what's the saying? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And that is, I cannot stress that enough when it comes to art, when it comes to creating things on your own. And that is just how things need to be done for you to truly have a voice, for you to truly have a style. You need to go out, do things on your own, and continue to do things that you like without listening to others. So if you want to download the presets for yourself, if you weren't able to make it last week and you want to check those out, you can download them right now by heading over to learn, learn.beginnerphotographypodcast.com, and you will see a grouping of several courses that I have, and one of them is the 52 free Lightroom presets. So go ahead and download that yourself. Then there's also an instructional video on how to install them and get started with presets. So that is it for this week. Until next time, I want you to get out, I want you to go shoot, I want you to focus on yourself and stay safe. All right, I love you all.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.